The Illusion of Material Reality, a methoxetamine and 2C-B trip report, uploaded to Earwid by Vastness on December 20th, 2019. I feel like I might be saying this a lot recently, but apart from a fairly harrowing and difficult experience on another psych and dissociative combo recently, which was far more immersive and far stranger, this one was in a sense completely different, and also in many ways, so much more powerful because of the consistent lucidity of the experience. Some parts of the experience, as ever, defy words, and although at the time I wondered if I could change forever from this point forward, as ever, the descent back from the higher consciousness of the psychedelic state brings back all the illusions and trappings of sober life, and the accompanying doubt in the existence of anything beyond this thinly veiled illusion of the material. In any case, firstly, some backstory. I was not in the best place mentally. I'd been looking forward to a date with a very interesting and beautiful girl, which had been cancelled at the last minute, her having just started getting serious with someone else. I tried to stick to my usual routine of gym, meditation, positive habits and exercise, and thus had seen a friend earlier in the day and worked out for about an hour and a half. A relevant factor is that in the morning that day, I imbibed 200mg of phenylparacetam and 100 micrograms of Adamax, a longer-lasting analogue of the Russian nootropic Semax, as an exercise performance enhancer and slight mood lift. This was at about 9:30 am. 5 or so hours later, I was very tired and starting to feel quite down. Although I had told myself I would not use any MXE for at least another few months, I did also use 100mg yesterday, I found myself automatically getting the baggie out and starting to cut 20mg lines. One note before we begin. Timestamps are essentially guesses. I didn't make any real notes, I just looked at the clock a few times, but I think they're accurate enough. T-1 hour. Pre-doses, MXE, analysis of potential interactions. I started dosing about 6 PM, 8 hours and 30 minutes after the nootropics. Phenylparacetam has a half-life of 3 to 5 hours, so going by the approximate 5 half-lives rule for essentially total clearance, I probably still had at least 25mg in my body, although whether this was exerting any residual effects is an open question. Semax itself has a much shorter half-life of just a few minutes, although allegedly, its effects on the body can persist up to 24 hours, so it's quite possible this small dose of Adamax was exerting some residual effect on my neurochemistry. Anyway, while watching a show on Netflix, a hobby which I previously had something of a problem with, but have really made a solid effort at knocking it on the head recently through practicing positive habits and attempting to always be present and not waste my precious time on Earth, but this time I was allowing myself to indulge, just to self-soothe through external sensory distractions. I started out with 40mg, then I was dosing lines of MXE every 20 minutes or so I was done with the 80mg by about 7 PM. Just prior to the last line, I started thinking that maybe I should take a psychedelic instead. I always feel dissociatives are somewhat dark, destructive drugs. Yes, maybe they provide access to a similar realm as psychedelics do, but they do so through twisted channels and at considerable psychological cost, especially for more habitual or frequent users, where the corrosive effects of the psychic intrusion, so to speak, start to cause wear and negative effects on the mind. This is true for most people, I think, although I don't doubt some people do manage to use dissociatives safely, mindfully, and while steering clear of them whenever the darker edges start to show. I personally just did not. Indeed, even using small doses of MXE, 100mg or so in a night, makes my bladder hurt a little even after a several-month break from ketamine, which should be concerning enough for me to stop entirely, but it so far hasn't been. T0 hours, 24mg of 2C-B. I've been planning to take a new 2CX chemical soon, but this night I did not feel up to taking something unfamiliar, so I settled on 2C-B, a substance I have done a few times and which I find to be quite forgiving on the whole. I only took a small dose at first, around 8mg, and I then decided to up this with another 16mg, taking my total dose to 24mg of 2C-B, combined with 80mg of MXE. At first, I continued watching the show I was sitting through. It was a somewhat dark episode where a character just hung themselves, but I tried to just keep myself present, and began to think I was being shown this to remind myself that no matter how bad I thought things were, they were still a lot better than they could have been. I had, prior to this, been starting to feel quite good. A combination of the gentle come up of 2C-B plus the MXE starting to set in, although I did think initially that the MXE was feeling a little mild. Maybe dose played a factor. Maybe the famous dissociative sobriety delusion, either of which could have contributed to my decision to take 2C-B, which was rather spontaneous and unplanned. In any case, at this point, maybe 30 minutes into the 2C-B, I was not getting any real visuals as such, but was starting to feel a strange, slightly anxious feeling. Maybe not too unfamiliar with any psychedelic, at least for me. Finally, I decided I could no longer stomach the grim storyline I was watching, so I switched to something a bit more light-hearted. I found I couldn't really follow this, and in fact found the fast-moving pace of the pictures and colours a little hard to follow and disorientating. So I tried putting on some music. This was equally disconcerting though, so I shut my laptop and went to simply lie down, telling myself I was just going to meditate lying down and feel the sensations wash over me as they may. T plus 1 hours, ? Lying down with eyes closed. I lay down in silence and closed my eyes. At this point the experience, I would say, although veering into somewhat uncomfortable territory, was still quite mild. With my eyes closed, I watched the movements of roiling shades of grey behind my eyes, like some kind of sea of liquid rubber suspended in white space, while various blobs connected and diverged from the other floating blobs with rubbery tendrils. I was starting to feel something else at this point, although I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was exactly. I decided rather than clearing my mind, to try to take a more active role in the experience, and try to feel my astral self and my chakras. I've been reading a little about chakras recently, and although I'm not entirely sure I believe in them, I had an insight of sorts during a period of sober meditation that appears to have benefited me in controlling difficult feelings in everyday life. So, I tried to focus on my energy body. As I did this, the grey sea of blobs began to darken, and new colours began to appear. Bright colours of electric green and yellow and blue and red. And I realised that I was no longer seeing the field of view behind my closed eyes, but a network of energy that was within myself. Honestly, the specifics of this experience, especially chronology, are somewhat lost in my drug-infused memory. But I was vaguely aware that something magical seemed to be happening. I opened my eyes, got up and went to the toilet, and could feel that familiar, mild urinary retention and bladder twinge while urinating. This concerned me, of course, although it immediately struck me that it was not permanent. Nothing was. And this was a challenge that the universe itself had set before me. As long as I just don't do any more MXE, I'll be fine. T plus 1 hour and 30 minutes. Wandering. Entity contact. While I was walking out the bathroom, it was like my body was coursing with energy. Not all of it comfortable. Some of it I worry about having damaged my health in a way I knew I should have known better than to do. Additionally, just unidentifiable, uncomfortable body sensations. I decided to try and probe this further, and had an urge to just close my eyes, and try to listen into the sensation, to feel again, my astral self. During my sober meditations, as I mentioned, I became aware of some kind of tingling, erratic, unstable energy in my chest, which I identified as my heart chakra. Upon reading further, earlier while sober, an energy blockage in the heart chakra seemed to match a lot of the negative psychological issues I had been struggling with, and still am to some extent. Anxiety, demotivation, apathy, trouble connecting with others. And I was granted, thought of, had the insight into a visualization I could do, envisioning a golden orb in the centre of my chest. Like I was consciously stabilising this blockage, and allowing the life energy of the cosmos to flow through me unimpeded. I've since been able to use this technique to bring myself back to the present, and separate myself from the ceaseless ocean of my seething human mind. With some successes, I might say. In any case, I tried to begin with this, to feel the energy in my heart chakra, and use this energy to create a suction effect, to draw energy from the earth through my legs, abdomen, to the top of my head, and thus feel where my body was weakest. As this happened, it was like suddenly I was separate from this pain. I was within my body still, but I was also something else. Like I'd partially uncoupled my soul from its incarnate form, and I could observe myself, without judgment, objectively, and see the areas I was doing damage. Bladder, kidneys, lungs from the occasional cigarette. More general effects of poor health decisions in some sense. But for these moments, I didn't feel it. The same multicoloured fractalising ocean of blobs in blackness, like an infinite multi-dimensional lava lamp, danced behind my eyes. I opened them again, and partially came back to the physical. At this point, the open eye visuals were ramping up. I was seeing traces. No solid object was truly solid anymore. The black textured marble effects of my kitchen worktops were swirling and moving like water, and I realised at this point that everything was shimmering in the winds of eternity. My mind's filtering mechanism for the all-consciousness that pervades all of existence was no longer able to keep things constrained, and I felt like in a moment everything could just dissolve. Everything is surface detail, an illusion, but the illusion of time keeps us anchored to it. I felt like the veil of reality was becoming translucent, offering me the chance of a tantalising glimpse at what lay beyond. At the same time, my body was feeling like it was suffering somewhat, possibly under the strain of overstimulation from the MXE and 2C-B combo, combined with the hour and a half of high-intensity training I had done earlier, and probably not giving myself ample time to recover from. I walked back into my front room, slowly this time, trying my best to just be, not think of the past, the future, or the worries of the day or of life. Just focus on this moment right now, for this moment surely wouldn't last. But I was in the holy place of magic, and if I wanted to get anything out of it, I needed to not fight it. In fact, I had to savour it as best I can. But, as I mentioned, I do have some residual anxieties and fears I'm working through, which manifest typically as a tightness in my chest, which sometimes makes everyday life a struggle, even when it should be easy, or I should say, would seem easy to some. Sat down on my sofa and opened my laptop. Immediately after, I closed it again. Technology was not what I wanted right now. I had a few moments of apprehension, even fear, and I was considering if I could truly handle this, whether I should take an Atizolam or Valium of 2 to calm down. I told myself I would not, however. I've softened the majesty of such celestial experiences enough times already. It was time to brave this onslaught of divine grace with courage, without diluting it with anything else. I had zero desire to do any more MXE at this point. Accessible though it would have been, I was probably still on it, that said, but wanted to have as pure as an experience as I could. I could see no way to distract myself or make it easier. So, I sat down in my chair I usually used to meditate, again in silence, and closed my eyes. The visuals now had taken on a different character of sorts, of impossible shapes moving more slowly, but of incredible beauty. The tendrils within myself I felt before were now reaching out into something that was not myself. Something before me began to form a shape of indefinable dimensions, ever-changing colours, and some kind of background, slow music, like it was coming from a far distance started up in my head. Writing this now, I believe I heard this far more faintly than when I was first lying on my bed, but it was low enough in volume to dismiss. This time, it wasn't. This is some kind of celestial song of the universe or the divine that I often hear during trips, especially if I do them in silence. Although to be honest, I do not trip in silence too often, but usually towards the end when I am lying down, trying to come down, I will hear this sound. In any case, this shape was a smooth fluid of electric tendrils branching out in all directions. It was somehow rotating, but in the same way that a shape of more dimensions than we can usually perceive would rotate. If not quite sure what this means, watch a video of a rotating tesseract or hypercube as visible from a three-dimensional observer. Look like that, but far more complex, somehow with infinitely more vertices, corners, and possibly changing form as it went. The energy tendrils entwined with my own, and I felt their touch, and I immediately felt something not of this world. I could scarcely handle the electricity, which seemed to be filling my mind to the exclusion of all thought, all that I thought I knew, and I felt the telepathic communication from this being, or rather a collection of beings, without words. But they told me that I had been put on this earth for a purpose, and that while I was on earth, I would not know them, I would not see them, and I would forget what I truly was. But everything is playing out as it always would. Everything was playing out as planned. No matter where I was in life, I was here for a reason. I was here because of the orchestration of forces I could not hope to comprehend. All this being the case in some sense, I recognised that I was a part of them, or had been at one point, and maybe would be again. At that point, I opened my eyes. Within the room before me was a translucent being, with some kind of triangular head, which seemed a more stable, less fluctuating and incomprehensible version of the shape I'd seen before. But the being was entirely translucent. If you've seen the camouflage suit in the film Predator, that's what they looked like. My eyes were transfixed. I did not dare look around or away. In this moment, I had no doubt of the reality of this, but I also felt I should just not look away. The entity stood very close to me, towered over me. Not sure if it had limbs, but I felt it enveloping me with some kind of energy field. Maybe long, spindly arms. Maybe the same tendrils I saw before with my eyes closed. Out of the corner of my eyes, I could see more such figures, standing back, almost invisible in their translucent forms, some anthropomorphic, some amorphous, some just something else. I had the sensation of being in the presence of the divine movers behind reality. No words were spoken, and I was frightened, but I did not feel any malice from these entities, only love. I had this sensation that some of these entities had been humans once. This was like an innate sensation, like my own soul could sense others of my kind, but some of them had never been human. Not that they were alien, maybe just never incarnate, truly of a different plane. At this point, I did speak, believing fully that I was in the presence of consciousness immaterial, that had transcended or just always been above this physical world. I asked if my father was with them. My father had died recently, about 2 years ago, and I was informed that he was. I'd closed my eyes again. The visual impact seemed to somehow cloud my ability to perceive whatever was coming through from behind the veil. I sensed some kind of chatter, and was told that he was there. At this point, it was like I could suddenly feel his presence, although I couldn't see him entirely. The translucent shapes when I closed my eyes gave way to oscillating layers of colour, intertwining, overlapping. Some kind of energy I cannot truly describe, but which I understood to be a conglomerate of all who had given me the gift of this vision, as well as some kind of higher reflection of individual consciousness from elsewhere in space and time. My father was very ill when he died, and not the person that he once was. We also had a very difficult relationship, for which we could be said, in some sense, to both share the blame. Although, I take responsibility for it, because I'm only responsible for my own actions. I then began to perceive a particular sheet of rippling energy move forwards to overlap most of the rest, behind only the oscillating hyper-object, which remained directly before me, seeming to facilitate this connection with the other world. Again, no words were spoken from the entities, but I sensed from them that indeed my father was with them, and I perceived my father making himself known kindly, although he did not speak, indeed couldn't speak, for the veil could not be entirely surpassed, perhaps not even by these pseudo-gods or eternal spirits. T+2 hours. Overwhelming emotional release. At this point, I found myself crying, something I have not really done since my father died. I bent over in my chair, opened my eyes and looked at the ground, immediately abashed to be given the audience I had been apparently given. I thanked my father tearfully for all he had given me in life, and said I was so sorry that I had not been kinder to him. As I spoke these words, I had the sensation that he understood, and more, and I would too one day, but for now could let it go, and I felt other entities voicing their input like a silent celestial cacophony of direct-to-mind silent sounds, overlaid with the celestial music and a new deep oscillation from the object, that started to change faster and create a noise like of an oscillating piece of thick metal in air, until it reached a crescendo and was gone. I suddenly breathed, great gasping breaths, sucking in air to take everything in, so humbled and awestruck, as I tried to appreciate the majesty of what I had touched and what I had seen. I looked around the room and realised that everything was exactly as it was supposed to be. The moment is all there is, and this was the moment. At this point in time, I had no worries at all. I had absolute faith in the universe, myself, and God himself, herself, itself, that I was on the only path I could be on. I had arrived here in the only way I ever could, and I would live my life in the only way I was ever going to, even if the future was uncertain, unknown, or simply forgotten to me. I got up, just to try to orient myself after this breathtaking inner journey. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I walked back into the kitchen under the bright fluorescent light to look at the shimmering visuals. Everything was alive still and shimmering. While the entities themselves were starting to recede from my consciousness, I could still feel them just behind the veil. The room sparkled with magic energy, rippling again with waves from the ether that coursed through my mind and forced open the usually tightly closed filtering mechanisms that allow us to operate in sober reality. I realised I was now quite dizzy, even sick, like I might need to purge or throw up, collapse, lie down. I really didn't want to do this, and tried to steel myself, bizarrely. I remember thinking I didn't want to embarrass myself in the presence of the gods, like this was a test to see if I was worthy to be given the lesson they wanted to give me. Suddenly, I just stopped still, standing bolt upright, looking at a white tile on the wall. This time, I felt another presence reaching through the void, one of something almighty, of inconceivable power, and as it observed me, the power of its gaze sent an invincible feeling of divine, otherworldly power surging through my limbs, and right then I felt like I could truly weather anything. Indeed, I had a duty to, and I would be granted strength by God. I realised again that life was all around us, not as we understand it, but awareness, consciousness in some form. I also realised that I was but a vessel for the almighty Lord God of all creation. I'm using a somewhat Christian metaphor here, although I explicitly am not Christian. I don't subscribe to the Jesus mythology at all, yada yada. It's just what came to my mind, arguably because my upbringing was Christian. I just had to fall to my knees, and again I spoke. I said something like, "I surrender to your grace. Use me as your vessel. I am your instrument on earth." I might have cried again while I said this. I felt honestly like a warrior for God. But the battle was life itself, and to live it, and exert my will in the only way I am able. I think some of this, I must admit, beautiful as the experience was the classic dissociative egotism creeping in and casting shade on the psychedelic experience, like I myself was unique and special, but my belief was not entirely egotistical in nature, for I understood at this point that this is true for all of us. We are all vessels, mere conduits for the universal, multiversal, omnipotent, self-creating boltzmann brain of infinity itself. I touched the earth, actually the tiles on my kitchen floor, and could feel the raw power of history surging beneath me. I knew I was not the first to be touched in this way, and I felt the strength of every strong, courageous, brave or good action taken by any human being, indeed even pre-human beings, that had brought me to where I was now. I've been feeling quite lonely, as I mentioned at the beginning, but in this moment, again I realised that we are never alone. We are always surrounded by the souls of all who have come before us, and indeed, all who will come after us. Love is all around us, and all of us, no matter what our differences are working towards the advancement of life and love in the only way we know how. Even when it seems we're doing the opposite, everything happens the only way it can. T plus 2 hours and 30 minutes. Breaking one of my golden rules of tripping and calling someone. I had the urge to call someone. I noticed with some surprise it was only about 9:30, so I'd been tripping for 2.5 hours now, although it seemed like a lot longer. As I say, at this point I had an urge to call someone, so I picked up my phone, put it down again quickly, and thought about that again. I have this golden rule, so as not to cause nuisance, embarrassment or fallout while in deep trips alone, which is to under no circumstances text, call or answer phones, unless it seems to be an absolute emergency, and I was lucid enough that my previously ingrained safety subroutines were still intact. Whatever news this was that I wanted to share, it could wait until later. However, my sister texted me about something. I texted back that I loved her, and she immediately guessed I was tripping. I phoned, and we had a brief chat, although after voicing my love and finding she was actually about to drive from work and seemed a bit stressed, I felt a little awkward, so I quickly let her go. She was cool about it though, and my decision to call her definitely was the minimum amount of fallout, all things considered. She might joke about it later, but that's it. Other options I considered were my mum, so glad I didn't do this, or a friend who actually is recently going through the whole AA/NA thing, so I did not feel it would be appropriate, and I might have perceived a judgy vibe whether imaginary or not. On hanging up however, the awkwardness was immediately dismissed, as I realised this was just another joke of the grand game of the human condition, an illusion of the mind. I realised as I started to come down that some of my anxieties about what I had done, my life, how I was going to operate tomorrow, work, etc., were coming back, but I was able to quickly dismiss them and just laugh. This is the cosmic joke of the game of human life. These things have been put here for a reason, challenges to help us grow and fulfill our divine purpose, and we need to live with them, overcome them. Indeed, it is our sacred duty to do so as best we can, and to help others to do so as well, as best we can. But there is just no reason to surrender to them, only to surrender to the whims of the gods, the universe, or fate, or whatever reality really is, which is surely something stranger than any of us can ever imagine. T plus 5 hours. Coming down. I did start to feel very scatty, overstimulated, just not pleasant, and my bladder pain started to return around 12 midnight, 5 hours after dosing. I tried to just resume what I was doing, but was just feeling very restless, still quite overstimulated and uncomfortable. Eventually, I took 2 milligrams of Atizolam and 10 milligrams of Valium to sleep. Day after, and afterthoughts. I woke up early, and honestly have taken about the same amount of benzos, theanos today. I put this down more to the MXE than the 2C-B, but I felt very scattered and uncomfortable, but also just great. Very, very grateful to be alive, and with an overwhelming love for everyone I know. I plan to make a point of telling all my friends and family that I love them when I see them next, which I never do, but we should tell the people we love that we love them. I won't say that this was so powerful it changed me overnight, but I have a resistance to such immediate change anyway, as drugs of course delude just as much, or arguably more often, than they offer us real insights. I prefer to let things settle and see what sticks. Honestly though, I think I'm done with all that aryl cyclohexylamines now. They never offer me too much that I don't believe could be offered in a more pure way with psychedelics alone. They are in many ways just pure self-indulgent hedonism, and most importantly, they make my bladder hurt, even in low doses, which is surely asking for trouble. To continue this would be insane. Same goes for cocaine, minus the bladder thing. I won't say I'll never do any of these ever again. I know how fickle and changeable and forgetful the human mind is, no matter how profound the lesson, but it will be years. This is probably the closest I got ever to developing an actual, honest-to-God belief in God, afterlives, pre-lives, and an ethereal realm beyond what we can perceive in the material. I don't really know what to make of this now. I'm just so cynical and bound to neurological, mechanistic explanations of human interpretations of divine phenomenon. But during this trip, I felt without a doubt that God is real, that gods are real, death is not the end, ethereal beings are always with us, and that there is an ethereal plane inaccessible to us but always around us. Is it true and not a delusion? Who knows? I guess it's impossible not to forget again once we return to a sober state. Our minds just naturally filter it out, or maybe start functioning normally again and separating reality from fiction. I hope you all enjoyed reading regardless.